Hi, my name is Deb from DG Reads, and it's time for another Architect. If you're not familiar with my Architect series, I do have 3 previous episodes. I'll have a playlist linked for you, but this is basically an excuse for me to get to what I need to be reading, all the really highly anticipated advanced copies that I've requested and received, and try to get my thoughts and reviews to you, hopefully before a lot of these books actually hit the shelves, to give you an idea if they are something you might want to read, or maybe it's something that might not be for you. I always go into these without really a set TBR. I have a lot of options, but a lot of the time I do this based on a combination of mood reading and trying to get to the books with the nearest publication dates. So I have a lot to get to this month. I'm hoping to get this Architect out at the very beginning of October, and we'll see how it goes. So I am looking forward to reading some fantastic books and taking you along for the ride. Okay, for my next arc, I have gone ahead and picked up The Registration Rewritten. This is by Madison Lawson, and I received a gifted e-arc from Camcat Books. This is the sequel to The Registration, which I read when it first came out and enjoyed, so I was excited when they offered me a copy of the sequel. And it's very hard to talk about a sequel without spoilers, so I am going to give you a vague idea of what this universe is about without getting in too deep into the plot of book 2, which would spoil what happened at the end of book 1. This is set in a world where everyone who has been registered, at least in this country, has the right to kill one person in their lifetime. And this can be anything from murdering someone you don't like to helping someone commit suicide who maybe is dying and in a lot of pain and suffering from illness. It can be an abortion. It can be anything that is deemed ending a life. And this can be done only once in your lifetime. Everyone has kind of equal access to it if you are registered. Our main character, Linnell, is in line to register the man who abused her as a child to kill him. And in doing so, she hears somebody else who's a complete stranger give her name as someone they are planning to kill. And this turns into a wild ride of multiple weeks of people trying to kill her, her trying to survive, her having to reach out to people for help, and family drama, history drama, and just a lot going on. And a lot of twists and turns in that book lead us to where we are now in book number 2. So it's very hard to say too much. I will confirm we are still following Linnell. Obviously, she survived book 1. That was the point of book 1, was getting her to survive. And this one is picking up in a way that gets really into the politics of this whole idea of the registration. We're following her. We're also following people who are part of a resistance, the Resurrection. They're the ones who think the registration needs to be done away with. And we are seeing different sides of this movement and some threats against our main characters. And there's a lot going on in this one. It took me a little bit to get back into the world. It's been a while since I read book 1, but I did find that this book did a good job of kind of catching me up on what I was forgetting, giving some really quick summaries without feeling like it was info dumping the entire first book. And so I think the author did really well with that. And now that I'm at the halfway point, I am fully engaged. I'm enjoying the politics and the discussions that go into the idea of this world. So I'm eager to go ahead and continue, and I'll be back once I have final thoughts. Okay, I'm back because I finished up The Registration Rewritten last night, and I had a good time with this overall. I think it had places where it got slow for me, where I wasn't quite as compelled to keep reading. It did take me a few days to read through it, which could also just be because life is a little chaotic right now, and a book with just a physical form to read it in took me longer and would have taken me longer regardless. I did have to kind of pick it up and put it down just because of my schedule. The book itself comes to a lot of conclusions. I like the way the story arc of the different characters came together and opinions changed and good conversations were had about things. I think there was a lot of political maneuvering in this book, which I really enjoyed seeing that play out. I think that all made sense for the way the story was going. In the end, I feel like I'm a little confused whether this was setting up for a book 3 or whether this left some things unfinished. It definitely told us at the end the direction things were going, what was going to wind up happening, where the characters were planning to take their changes to the system they were planning to rewrite, as you can tell by the title, but it didn't actually show those things happening. So that's where I'm wondering if we're going to get a book 3 or if this was the end and it just felt a little unfinished to me. But still, overall, I did have a good time with this book. I am glad that I picked it up, that I got to spend more time with some of these characters, and I think they did a good job of casting doubt on some characters and having reveals happen on who was and wasn't trustworthy, and I gave this book 4 stars. Okay, I am reading a new arc, and that is The Lies We Conjure by Sarah Henning. This is a gifted copy from Tor, and it comes out on September 17th. This one was pitched as Knives Out meets Inheritance Game, but with witches, and all of those things are things I really enjoy, so I was excited to get a copy of this one. We begin the story with Ruby and Wren, and these are 2 teenage sisters, and they're approached by a woman who needs someone to stand in as her granddaughters, and they look enough like her granddaughters that no one has seen in ages that they can pretend that she's their Nona. So they agree to do this for a considerable amount of money, and they go with this woman to a family, I guess you would call it, dinner at this grand estate. And what they find out there is that these people are witches, and in the space of the dinner that's being held, the kind of head witch passes away and their grandmother figure disappears, and suddenly they're cut off from the outside world because this death was foul play, and the woman's will has directed them to find the relics that are hidden on the property and to figure out who killed her. So now we have Ruby and Wren, who are still having to pretend to be these long lost granddaughters, and they don't obviously have magic. They're not witches. They don't know anything about what's going on, really. They were prepped a little bit about who's who, but not all the ins and outs of the 4 lines of witches and their different magical powers and all of those types of things. We're following Ruby's perspective. We're also following the grandchildren of some of the other witch lines and getting some insight in that respect. I'm now through part 1 of the novel, which is around, I think, a little bit shy of half. I did struggle a little bit getting into this one. It didn't immediately hook me like the Inheritance games that this has been comped to. I understand the comp because the idea of finding these relics, they're getting clues, there's riddles, there's family involvement, there's family rivalry involved with it. So I think it's a good comp in that respect. I think I am finding this a little on the slow side, but I'm so intrigued by the concept. I love the idea of the witches. I'm really enjoying learning about the different magical lines. I think we're getting a little bit of an info dump in the way that the sisters are having to learn stuff so quickly and finding it in books, and we're reading journal entries that explain it to us, and some of that I think is just by need a really info heavy introduction to the book. So I'm hopeful that now that we have kind of that baseline information, that the story will pick up the pace a little bit going forward. I do find it interesting that none of the characters are putting that much thought into the fact that these 2 girls know nothing. They kind of write it off as, well, obviously they've been spelled to forget everything, but also the fact that they've been brought to this dinner with all of these people without being told anything. Nobody questions that, which is interesting. Character-wise, I think there's a couple of budding romances happening, but it's YA fantasy, so that doesn't surprise me too much, and I'm interested to see where we're going with it. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to feel about this book at the end, but I will find out, and I'll let you know when I get there. Okay, I'm back because I have finished The Lies We Conjure, and I have thoughts. This just didn't quite work for me. I did like the second half better than the first half. It did pick up quite a bit past that halfway point where I did my mid check-in, and I actually pretty quickly read through the next 35% maybe of the book and got through that yesterday, which was pretty good since this book was having a hard time capturing my attention. I really really liked the idea of the magic system in here and the 4 different lines of families with different types of magic and how that played out. And once we kind of got past that original info dump about it, it was easier to immerse myself in the story. I did find the last 15 to 20% to be very villain monologue filled. We get a lot of characters telling us what they've done. For various reasons, the villain at times is the only one who can talk, so it kind of made sense in the story, but that's just not my favorite kind of reveal in the end. It did have some twists and some unexpected turns I didn't see coming, so that was nice. I think in the very end, we got some relationships that came out of this, which on the one hand, one of them I was fine with. It was backed up in the story. The other one I felt like came out of the blue as a happily ever after almost relationship. I think in general, the world building I really liked. The characters were okay. I think the writing was good. It was fine. I think it was just the kind of younger side of YA type of relationships happening in here, and the plot structure and some of the things that it didn't quite work for me. So this winds up being a solid 3, maybe even a 3.5. I think my enjoyment takes the score down, but some of the other elements, the world and the writing and stuff, bring it back up a little bit more. So that's where I'm at with that one. I have already started on my next arc, so I will be back very, very soon with another update for you. But for now, that's it on this one. Okay, I'm back because I have started Sleep Tight by J.H. Markert, and you might be saying, Deb, that's not an arc, that's from Book of the Month. And you're not wrong, but I did also get the audio arc for this one from Dreamscape Media, so I am counting it as an arc for Arc Attack. So I am just shy of the halfway point in this, and I have read this much, about 150 pages, over the space of a couple hours this morning. So this is going really well. I'm very happy that we're taking a very positive turn with this next arc, and I'm having a great time. This one we're primarily following Tess, who is a detective. Her father was a man who was involved in arresting Father Silence. Father Silence was not a priest, but he posed as one. He kidnapped a bunch of children. He killed a bunch of children, and when her father arrested him, there was one boy in his possession who they rescued. But of course, he was very traumatized. And as the book opened, Father Silence is being executed. Death penalty has been enacted. And shortly after this, the next morning, Tess gets a call from an unknown man saying he's done something. And what he's done is killed her parents. And it is very brutal. And then her daughter goes missing. So we've got a lot of moving parts in here. The chapters are very short, especially at the beginning. We're getting flashbacks in the form of police transcripts and notes that her father left from the original case, because clearly this is tied to that. And there is a lot going on. Definitely gore, definitely some serious moments. This new serial killer is calling himself the Outcast. And there's a tagline that the synopsis opens with saying, "Beware the one who got away." And that has to do with the previous case as well. And is that the boy who got away? Is that something else, someone else who got away? There's a lot circling around this. There is a little bit of an element of an untrustworthy female character in here, in the sense that there's substance abuse and faulty memory from her time as a child when her father was dealing with this case. And that's not my favorite thing when it comes to a main female character, but I do like our main female character, and I think what she's been going through makes sense, I think, with some of the reveals we're gonna get. So I'm withholding judgment on that part of it. But like I said, I've been flying through this. I think I will probably fly through it in the next couple of hours and finish it up and be back with some final thoughts. Okay, I'm back because I flew through the second half of Sleep Tight. I started this maybe around 7 a.m. and finished it by like 3 p.m. It was really a quick read. It was super engaging. It was one that made me want to keep reading. So So all of that went really well. I will say there's probably a few things that felt like a little convenient. Characters knowing things that I'm not 100% sure they should have known. And there were a few twists in here that I didn't 100% feel like I was on board for, but not in a way that really took away from my enjoyment. So overall, really great read, really high 4-star. It didn't quite give me those 5-star feels, but it was close. I'd say a 4.5 even. So definitely recommend picking this one up. Book of the month, obviously, and a good one on audio as well. I really enjoyed that. You get some sections in here that are, now of course I'm not going to be able to find one, that are transcripts. And I don't always find those the best on audio just because the audio has to read out who's saying each line and all of that. But I thought the audio was well done. It didn't bother me too much, but I did keep kind of going back and forth between audio and print just because it was such a bingeable read. So definitely recommend checking this one out. And I will be back once I start my next arc. Okay, I'm back because I am halfway into my next arc, Fear the Flames by Olivia Rose Darling. The release date for this one was September 17th, and it's an audio arc that I received from PRH Audio. In this one, we're following Elwyn, who was born to the king, and she was bonded to dragons when she was born, basically. But the king tore those dragons away from her, locked them up, locked her up. She was able to get out, but the dragons are still in bondage, basically. It's now many years later, and she's got a kingdom of her own. Her father all these years hasn't really known if she was alive or not, but she's making kind of her comeback. She wants to get her dragons back, and she's made a deal with a commander from a different kingdom, and this commander, Caden, is willing to work with her to get those dragons back as long as she and her dragons will go to war on their quest to defeat her father's kingdom. This is a fantasy romance, so of course we're heading towards a relationship between these two. There's good banter, I would say, between them for the most part. There definitely have been some good lines. I really like the female main character. She's got a snarky attitude sometimes. She snaps back at him, and I do like that about her. I struggle a little bit with Caden's character. Partially, I think that's the audio. The narrator's choice of voice for him is very raspy and low, and it sounds very old, and it's not quite, I think, what we're supposed to envision for him in the book. He is definitely the character who comes to her rescue very frequently. She has him, she has a best friend who's also kind of swooping in and carrying her off at times, and some of that feels a little over the top to me. I have had a few moments where I really wish she would kind of speak up, where Caden's arguing with some other man about what she's going to be doing, and I really want her to kind of learn to step up a little bit more and shut those discussions down and say, well, this is my decision, so both of you shut it. That hasn't happened yet. Other than the male voice for Caden, I'm liking the audio. I think it's generally pretty good. I think just that one voice is something I've had to get over. I wind up enjoying the scenes where it's just her a little bit more. And we are just in her head. We're not getting his point of view either in the narrative. And there have been a few times where I kind of wondered if that might add a little extra interest. We're not getting a ton of action so far. There have been a few cool scenes related to the dragons. The dragons, of course, really aren't in the picture, but we're hearing about them. We're kind of seeing them from afar, basically. And I look forward to actually encountering the dragons in the text more, hopefully, going forward. Obviously, this is the first book in what I'm sure is a series. I am intrigued to see how the plot is going to progress, how we're going to get to these dragons, how these characters are going to develop. This is a debut novel. It was originally self-pub and has been, obviously, since I have it from Random House, traditionally picked up now. So it is new on the scene in the revised version. There is definitely a significant page count change between the self-pub and this one, so they have done some cleanup, I think, in editing. But I'm looking forward to seeing where this one goes. It's a really easy listen. It's one I find myself able to multitask to and still follow along and enjoy the story. So I'll let you know once I finished and share my final thoughts. I'm back because I finished Fear the Flames and I have final thoughts, and they're really mixed. From the synopsis, I went into this really thinking that this was going to be a heist story, and while that's there, a heist does happen. It's such a minor thing. It's a lot of buildup and talking about the need for a heist, and then you get to the heist and it's over in the blink of an eye. And I think a lot of kind of the moving parts happen off page, and that makes sense, I guess, because we're only following in Eloin's head, but it left me a little bit underwhelmed. Once the heist is over, we go purely into relationship and smut and things that just aren't what drew me to think this is a book that might have worked well for me. I did like the world building that we got. The dragons themselves, we don't see them for quite a while, and when we do see them, it's little glimpses from afar. So the dragons come into the story more the further you get into the book, and I did like what we got of them, so that gives me some hope for the future of the series potentially. The main character, Eloin, I really liked her. I liked the fact that she started to stand up for herself more as the book went on. I think I had mentioned earlier in my first clip that there was a scene where two men were kind of fighting with each other over her, and I just wanted her to step up and say something and shut it down. And I think she gets a little bit more of that backbone as we get further into the story. I liked her interactions with Caden, and I liked the bickering and the banter between them, and that part of it worked well for me. Since this was an audio arc that I'm reviewing, the narration generally was good. The voice choice for Caden's character and making it sound very old, kind of raspy, and a little quieter maybe, just continued to bother me throughout the book. That didn't really get to a place where I got used to it entirely. But apart from that, I did think the narration was generally good. This wasn't a book that really called me to keep picking it back up. The pacing I just felt was a little bit off. The writing was okay. It was a little bit more than it needed to be, a little bit longer than I think it needed to be for what it accomplished. But really my main complaint is just that we get a lot of buildup for a long time. It feels like we're not getting anywhere, and then we get into the action and it's over too quickly, in my opinion. I think this was a fine book. In the end, it's getting a 3 stars from me. I think it might appeal more to different readers, but for me, it just didn't quite hit the mark. So hopefully my next read will be much more of a thrilling adventure. I am continuing my ARC journey by reading The Village Library Demon Hunting Society. I have to look because it is a lengthy title and I keep mixing up some of the words. And this is by C.M. Waggoner, and this is a gifted e-arc from Berkley, and I have the gifted audio arc from PRH Audio. This one comes out on September 24th. This one is a bit of a twist for a cozy mystery. We're following an older woman. She's a librarian, and she is the kind of typical cozy mystery heroine who stumbles on a lot of murders and has a lot of people dying around her, and she steps in and investigates the crimes, easily figures out who's to blame, and solves it before the police can. She's never really questioned this, but she started to kind of wonder about the body count around her, and when somebody she really cares about is the next death, it causes her to spiral even more. She begins to realize there's something not natural about this. How is she able to solve every crime? How is it that everyone in her life expects her to step in and investigate everything that happens? She starts to ask questions. On top of this, her cat is possessed by a demon, it seems like. There's something weird going on there as well. So she's beginning to think there's a supernatural element to this small town life she's living, and is going for help to the new pastor in town. If it is a demon, does she need an exorcism? Does her cat need an exorcism? What's going on? She's enlisted the help of some friends. They're forming what the title is telling us is the Demon Hunting Society. So I love a good bookish setting. I wouldn't say the library is overly involved so much in the story so far, but it is is often the venue where things are taking place and where people are coming to meet, and she's confronting suspects who just go ahead and confess, and it's an interesting take. Cozy mysteries and me have a bit of a mixed history. I think they can be fun. They can also just be a little too light for me, and I haven't decided which direction this one is going in. I do appreciate the fact that it feels very meta in the way it's kind of looking at cozy mysteries and calling out some of the idiosyncrasies of cozy mysteries. I like that we're getting an older character. I think the cat being possessed was a twist I didn't expect, even though it is in the synopsis. I don't think I really had read the synopsis. The comps on this one are Murder, She Wrote meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I can see that. Definitely the older detective. She's got memory issues. The Buffy comp I get in the sense that there's a supernatural twist to it. To me, it doesn't give me Buffy vibes at all, but I get what they were trying to do with those two comps, leading to some expectations. So I'm interested to keep going. It's an easy enough audiobook to read and follow along. So I will be back once I have finished it to give you what my final thoughts are, because right now I have no idea what those are going to be. I am back because I did finish up the Village Library Demon Hunting Society today, and overall this wasn't really a book for me, but I did have appreciation for what it was doing. I think the main character was really interesting. I really liked getting an older main character, and I liked the way she started to think through everything that was going on to figure out who was to blame, who killed this person that she cared about, but also the bigger mystery of what's going on. Why is this town being hit with all of these murders? I really liked the way this kind of threw some of the tropes of cozy mystery on their head, and as someone who's not a big cozy mystery reader, that's something that stood out to me for sure. I did guess, I think, a little earlier than I was meant to, kind of who was behind everything, but I didn't mind the reveal. I thought that worked quite well. The demonic possession of the cat was interesting. We also get some different creatures talking, which was interesting, maybe less in a positive way for me personally, but overall I think it's well written. I think if you like a cozy mystery with a paranormal twist, this is one I would recommend checking out. For me, it winds up being about a 3.5 because just my interest level and my investment level dragged down my rating a little bit. But with that, I will go ahead and leave it here and be back once I start my next arc. My next arc is The Puzzle Box by Danielle Trussoni, and this is the sequel to The Puzzle Master, which I really enjoyed, so I was excited when I received the invitation to get this arc. This series follows Mike Brink, and he is a man with special abilities. He had head trauma when he was younger, and this created some neurodivergence where he has a issue with hyperfixation, and it can be a problem at times, but also some would call it a superpower because he has the ability to think through any puzzle, to think multiple steps ahead on what he's doing. He has the ability to solve things no one else can, and he has made a living for himself creating puzzles to challenge others. In this new installment, he's approached in a very kind of forceful way to participate in this challenge that no one exactly knows happens, but it's rumored to exist. And this ties back to a puzzle box in Japan that's been around for about 150 years, I believe, and no one's been able to successfully open it. The problem being that failing to open it properly results in death. There are multiple ways you can die, and there's just a history of people either turning up dead because they attempted it or never returning home. So for multiple reasons, he can't really feel like he can turn this down. He put some conditions on it, but he has to go. Both because there's some actual threats in the the real world, but also in his head. Once he kind of wraps his brain around a challenge, he can't walk away. It's part of the hyperfixation issues that he has. So a lot of the book up until where I am now, which is the halfway mark, has been very informative. It's kind of the history of the box. It's the setting in Tokyo, the setup of how he gets dragged into this. And at the halfway point, we're finally seeing the box. We're seeing the action start. And right where I finished last night before bed, there was a big twist. And I'm very curious to see where we're going from here. We've also got some sisters who have some sort of tie to this box, I'm assuming, because we're getting their POV as well. And they are from a family where they were raised, it seemed, with fighting abilities with some sort of extra purpose involved. And I'm intrigued to see how that's going to turn out, because there have been comments along the way where the person helping Mike access the box and so forth has thought about the fact that he's going to be surprised when he learns their true motive. So there's a lot of intrigue with this. I would say it is information heavy in the first half of the book especially, but it's interesting information. I wasn't bored by it, but you do have to go in expecting it to take a while, I think, to get to the puzzle box and to get into that more of the action. So far, this is going really well for me. I am eager to continue and will be doing so as soon as I stop filming. So I will be back pretty soon, probably with final thoughts. I'm back because I finished up the puzzle box and I had a good time with this one. I think it was a really interesting blend of genres. It definitely had a historical feel from all of the information we're getting about when the box was created and the society at that time, the royal family at that time. There's also a bit of a sci-fi element which carries over from book one that I had kind of forgotten about, quite frankly, but that added an interesting twist to the story. I enjoyed our moments working on the puzzles. Those, I would say, are relatively brief compared to what I might have expected coming into this story based on the premise, but the tension in those moments is definitely high and I enjoyed that. I like the aspects of our main character in dealing with their neurodiversity and how that's both a struggle and also a benefit, and some of the discussions that were had around that. Overall, I'm giving this book a very strong 4 stars, possibly a 4.5. It was really easy to listen to and follow along. I do think there were a few moments where having the text was helpful in terms of having access to being able to see the puzzles they're talking about on page and the words of the puzzles on page. These aren't really things I would sit down and try to figure out myself before the character does, but it was interesting to see it play out. I think this is one that if you enjoyed the first book, I would definitely recommend picking up the sequel. If you haven't read the first one, I think you could jump into this one fairly well. I think the author does a pretty good job of refreshing our memories of everything that happened in the first book and catching someone up if they haven't read it. So either way, this one is one I enjoyed, and I will be back when I have another arc to talk to you about. I've started what's probably my last arc for this vlog, and that is We Kept Her in the Cellar by W.R. Gorman. And this one is a gifted audiobook from Highbridge Audio. This is a Cinderella retelling from the stepsisters' POV, but not the story we've all heard. Cinderella is not the beautiful girl that's been mistreated by her family. Instead, as we're learning from Eunice, she's not even really human. She's a eldritch creature of some sort. She has to be kept locked away, and her family can control her within limits, but anyone who looks on her between midnight and 3 a.m. will fall under her spell and do her bidding. And it's dangerous to let her get a hold of creatures to eat. It's dangerous to let her be around people in general. And Eunice, being her stepsister, has had to take her in as family so that she can help control her. She and her stepfather, Cinderella's father, have a good relationship. Cinderella's father and Eunice's mother have a good marriage. There's a good family connection. Aside from this family secret they all have to keep about Cinderella. And it gets bloody, it gets a little scary in places, and where we're at now at the halfway point, things have taken a really abrupt turn in the way that our main character really sees her stepsister and in the way I think the story is going to go forward from here. We're seeing the prince of the Cinderella story in different eyes as well, and his connection to the stepsister first. So it's really interesting. I love a good retelling that takes a very creative approach to how it changes the storyline, and I think the author is doing a great job of that here. So I'm very eager to continue on with this one. This was purely it looked interesting, random cover pick off of NetGalley. I do have a retelling prompt for Magical Readathon that I can use for some extra points, so might as well go for it. And I'm excited for this one. It's just fun. It's not necessarily super in-depth, but I'm having a good time with it and look forward to continue. I've now finished We Kept Her in the Cellar, and I thought this was a lot of fun. It's very dark, very gory, very disturbing, oftentimes a lot of body horror, and definitely the darker side of the original Cinderella in terms of the story that we're retelling, not the fluffy Disney version of Cinderella. The plot takes some interesting turns that I enjoyed. It flips kind of the original narrative very much on its head. It ends in a very dark place, and I think it felt like it was setting up for the potential for a sequel. As best I can tell, at least Goodreads doesn't have it labeled as the start of a series yet, and you certainly do get a conclusion. I feel like it could end here, but still there are things where the story could go on and do more. So I'd be very curious to pick up a sequel if one were to be coming around. But in the meantime, I thought this was a lot of fun. It had a lot of creativity. It definitely made a lot of changes, and I liked the way different little elements from the original story were put into this reworking, reimagining, and how they became something really kind of terrifying. So I would recommend checking this one out if you enjoy a good fairy tale type retelling, a very dark story. Do go in expecting the gore and animal death. I would also add that as a trigger warning as well, but it was a good time. I'm giving this one a very solid 4 stars. And turns out I did lie to you. This wasn't my final book. I'm going to be picking up one more because the audiobook just came in and I've got time, I think, to read it and get it processed and reviewed and all of that before this video goes live. So we're going to throw one more book in, and I'll be back once I get going on that one. I'm back with my midway thoughts on what is for sure my last arc for this video, and that is This Cursed House by Del Sandeen. This is a gifted e-arc from Berkley, a gifted audiobook from PRH Audio, and this one comes out on October 8th. The book begins in 1962. We're following Gemma, who is a young black woman whose life has turned a bit upside down, and she's leaving Chicago to take a job in New Orleans. She's assuming that her job will be tutoring a child, but things aren't quite what she expected. When she gets there, things just are really weird. People in the town react weirdly to the fact that she's going to work for this family, and the family themselves are very bizarre. And she ultimately finds out that the house is under a curse and they're counting on her to be the one to break it for some reason. I will admit I struggled to get into this one initially. At the beginning, it really just felt like historical fiction and dealing with important topics, but not necessarily easy topics to read about, like racism and colorism and sexism and a lot of things that Gemma is discovering. Gemma is from obviously not a modern Chicago, being in the 1960s, but a more modern Chicago, and this family seems like they are living in the past in the way they deal with things, in the way they're not aware of certain movements that have happened in terms of rights for Black people. And like I said, at the beginning, it just felt purely like a historical fiction read. Once we start getting into the more gothic and the more spooky and the more weird type of moments, I got much more drawn in. And that's just a me thing. That's a me not dealing well at the moment with historical fiction necessarily. So don't take that against the book in any way. But it is gothic, which to me me does mean slow burn, so I did expect some of that. And we do start seeing some spooky things. For some reason, Gemma has always had a connection and ability to see ghosts, and this place in New Orleans seemed to be full of them. And the family is bizarre, very bizarre, and very insulated in some weird ways, in addition to just being a very closed off group. And this curse is part of that, but also just them as people. So I'm very intrigued to see where the story is going, and I will have more thoughts by the end. I think so far this is very well written, and it is delivering on the gothic atmosphere that I went into this hoping for. So I have high hopes that this will go well for the rest of the book. I'm back with my final thoughts on this cursed house and to wrap up this vlog. So as I got further into the book, I did get a lot more invested in the story. I really enjoyed the gothic atmosphere of this house and this residence, and the twisted nature of this family was really compelling, even as they were all very much, for the most part, unlikable. I think it felt a little on the long side to me. I thought we were kind of coming to a conclusion a few times, and then there were twists that happened and things started back up again, and it never 100% had me entirely hooked where I didn't want to put it down or where I couldn't put it down. I overall really enjoyed it. This is a debut novel. It's a stunning debut, really, and I would absolutely look for more in the future from this author. I would say in the end I had some mixed feelings, but it still was a 4-star novel for me. I think on the low end of 4 stars, but still 4 stars. So not a bad place to leave off this particular vlog. But it is time to go ahead and wrap this up before I decide I need to throw one more book in. I will have some more arcs to review in the not too distant future, but I think it's time to take a little bit of a break and focus in on some mood reading and some readathons for October. Let me know in the comments below, have you read any of these books or any of them on your radar? Are there any you're going to be adding to your TBR? Let me know all the things. And if you've made it this far and you don't have anything to comment, leave me a Halloween related emoji since we're kicking off spooky season. I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button below if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you're interested in more of my content, more of my ARC reviews, more of my bookish things. But for now, I will leave you here and catch you real soon in a new video.